It's always such a happy day for all gardeners when their little seedlings start to germinate. But that's where the trouble actually also starts for most beginner gardeners. Hey folks, if we haven't met before, my name is Tara. I garden in the Bay Area, and you are watching episode 6 of a 7-part series on complete indoor seed starting. Now, in case you missed the prior episodes and you want to catch up later, I talked about prepping and planning all of the seeds, and then we talked about setting up your indoor grow station, all the complete details of what you need. We also talked about what seeds you should be thinking about and planning for 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost, then 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, and finally 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost. Today, we're going to be talking all about managing and maintaining those seedlings indoors, because that is where a lot of gardeners get into trouble, especially if you're beginners. There's a lot of things that can go wrong if you're not paying attention to them between the time that your seedlings start to sprout and they're ready to go out in the garden. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we're going to be talking about that critical transition period when your seedlings just germinate. We're going to be talking about when to remove your humidity dome. We're going to be talking all about heat mats, when you need it and when you don't. And we're also going to be talking about the light and the distance and how to adjust that for optimal growth of your seedlings. We'll then talk about watering and proper moisture management. We'll talk about fertilization as well and how to do that. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about troubleshooting and preventative care, pests, disease management, maintaining proper airflow, all of that good stuff. And then finally, we're going to be talking about up-potting your seedlings. Should you, shouldn't you, why you should, all in preparation for moving your seedlings into the great outdoors. So let's start with the easy part first, the humidity dome. Now, humidity domes are used to maintain the moisture and humidity, which really encourages most seedlings to grow and germinate faster. And you want to remove it when about 70% of the seedlings have germinated. You can see here, maybe about half of them have germinated, half of them are not there yet. So I'll keep this humidity dome on for a little bit more. But if you look over here, I've got a lot of them. They've germinated already. In fact, I've already up-potted some. Yep, they don't need the humidity dome anymore. So that goes. Now, the heat mat is a little bit of a different story. So let's talk about heat mats. Now, heat mats are designed to raise the soil temperature. In fact, it says over here that this particular heat mat raises the temperature 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit above the ambient temperature. Now, why is this important? It's because the germination processes, the enzymatic reactions and metabolic processes that take place within a seed to make it germinate are stimulated under warmer conditions rather than the outside temperature. So that soil temperature, really important for better germination. Now, you can think about seeds roughly in 4 categories, depending on whether or not they need heat to germinate. There is the category that absolutely requires heat to germinate. So things like okra, eggplant, peppers, they will not germinate in cold soil. They need that 75, 80 degree temperature soil to germinate. And then there are seeds that benefit from heat to germinate, but will germinate even if they are not supplied with a heat mat. So things like tomatoes and corn and sunflowers and melons, cucumbers, things like that, they actually benefit if you give them heat, but they will still germinate even if the soil is a little bit cooler. However, they will take a lot longer to germinate, and there is also a much higher probability of seeds rotting before they germinate. And so the germination won't be as uniform. So I would give that category also a heat mat to help them germinate faster and also to get more consistent germination. And then there are seeds that really do not want heat to germinate. So these are mostly the cool weather crops, things like lettuce and peas and your brassicas, your kale, your cabbage, your cauliflower. Those, you do not want to give them heat because that can actually trigger a second dormancy in the seeds. They may think, oh my gosh, it's too warm. We're not going to grow anyway, so we're not going to germinate. We're going to stay dormant. So it actually is not beneficial. Not just that, it can prevent germination of cool weather seeds. And then the final category of seeds can actually be killed off by heat mats. So these are things like poppy seeds, larkspur, delphinium, a lot of those cool weather and perennial flowers, yeah, you do not want to give them a heat mat at all. So, some best practices for using heat mats. First off, it is ideal if you have a soil temperature probe. A lot of these heat mats, this one doesn't, but a lot of heat mats are sold with a temperature probe setup where you can actually stick the probe in the soil and it will trigger this heat mat on or off depending on the temperature of the soil. So, ideally, you want to do that because sometimes these heat mats do tend to fluctuate a little bit in temperature. So that probe thing will trigger it on and off, and that would really be ideal. But I've been able to use it pretty successfully without the probe. So choice is yours, better to have that probe. So how long should you leave your heat mat on during the day? Technically, you can leave your heat mat on continuously. I usually just turn it on during the day and turn it off at night, but you can leave it on continuously because remember, the soil temperature does not fluctuate as much as the ambient temperature outside. So even though it might be really cold at night, your soil takes a little longer to cool off. So it usually maintains a fairly consistent temperature, and that's why you want to keep your heat mat on all the time. Choice is yours. Then also you want to remember to remove your heat mat, just like your humidity dome. As soon as you see about maybe 75% of the seeds have germinated, remove the humidity dome as well as the heat mat. They don't need that heat anymore to grow, most of them. They just need it to germinate. And then finally, size of the container is really important as well. The shallow containers, obviously, the soil will heat up a lot faster than the taller containers. Let me actually show you my moringa seedlings to make my point. Yeah, so these moringa seedlings really need warm soil to germinate. So I've got all kinds of sizes of containers, as you can see over here. These germinated the fastest. These were out in like less than a couple of weeks. These, on the other hand, you can see the container is much larger. Took a good couple of months to germinate, close to a couple of months. Yeah, the temperature of the soil, if I actually feel it, it's really cold on the top. So you want to have shallow containers. Something like this, for example, is actually ideal. You don't want to get very tall containers because your seeds need to be in that warm soil, and that warm soil is closest to the heat mat. All right, now you know all about heat mats and humidity domes. Couple more things for that critical transition period. First off, the distance of the seedlings from the grow lights needs to be about 2 to 6 inches. In fact, you can see over here, my little tomato seedlings are really close to the grow lights. These are a little further down. Those really tall seedlings are actually quite close and a little too close to the grow lights. But you get my point. It should be within 2 to 6 inches from the grow light. If not, your seedlings will tend to reach, they'll grow long, they'll grow thin, skinny stems, and they just won't be strong. Another thing you really want to pay attention to is making sure that the grow lights have ample coverage over all your seedlings. In fact, this grow light was a little bit more centered, and as a result of that, those cosmos seedlings were just reaching and stretching, and they were starting to look really bad. So I had to move it, and now everyone's doing okay. But pay attention to that. Pay attention to your reaching seedlings, even though they may look, oh, nice, it's growing nice and tall. No, that's actually a bad thing. You want short, stocky, sturdy seedlings. Those are the strong ones. And speaking of short, stocky, strong seedlings, another thing that you really want to get in place is a fan. Now, the fan will cause the seedlings to sway gently, just like they would do in the outdoors, and that actually helps strengthen the stems as well. In fact, I often come and gently brush my seedlings, and that really helps as well. As I pass, I just do this. Kind of pet your seedlings. All right, let's now talk about watering and feeding your seedlings. So watering is, I think, one of those things that even the most experienced gardeners do tend to mess up with. I think we all tend to extra love our little seedlings, and one of the ways that we do that is by giving them a lot of water. Now, don't get me wrong, water is really important, especially when the seeds have not yet germinated. If they are not moist, if they dry out, they won't germinate. So you want to keep them constantly moist. And then as soon as they germinate, those little roots, they're still so tiny. They don't have enough length to go out reaching and trying to find water. So you do need to make sure that the soil stays nice and moist, but not really sopping wet. And the best way to really moisten the soil is by bottom watering. Let me show you how I do it. These Lisianthus seedlings are notorious for being one of the most difficult plants to grow from seed, and partly because they grow very, very slowly. And because they are indoors for so long, they develop algae, and the seedlings are really, really tiny and they stay tiny like forever. So it requires a lot of patience and a lot of very careful management and maintenance when it comes to watering. And there's a couple of ways to tell whether your seedlings need moisture or not. One of the ways is actually by just lifting it. If it feels lightweight, actually this feels pretty light, it means that they probably need water. Another way, which is kind of difficult because I use vermiculite on top of my soil because the algae tends to develop otherwise. But the soil, if you're using particularly things like peat moss, for example, over here, you can see that the soil is kind of lighter in color. That usually means that it needs water. This, on the other hand, is nice and dark. Plenty of algae. In fact, I have been overwatering over here, and you'll notice that it doesn't have the vermiculite that this one has, and hence the algae tends to form a lot more in these moist, humid conditions. I talked about algae in my previous videos, but just real briefly, algae is not something that I worry about too much, especially if the seedlings have already sprouted and are growing nicely. They do tend to be a little bit of a problem when the seeds are really tiny, and so the seedlings are really tiny too. And then you've got that algae that's sticky on the top. It prevents the seedlings from germinating properly. So that's usually when it's a problem. And then also with those seedlings that I just showed you, the Lisianthus seedlings, the algae also tends to grow into little teeny plants that can compete at the root level with teeny tiny seedlings like that. So I usually just use a pin or a toothpick or something and scratch off the algae when I see it, just to kind of disrupt its growth, because it's not too harmful, but then I just don't want it in my soil. So let's cover water and fertilization in one shot here. So you can use any liquid fertilizer. I've got some liquid seaweed over here. It has quite a bit of nitrogen. You can see it's a very diluted mixture to begin with, but even this, I am going to dilute it. So I will take the directions that they say, and then I kind of double the amount of water. So it is only half strength. You can even go quarter strength if your seedlings are really tiny. So I've already mixed it up with this water. By the way, any liquid fertilizer will do. You can use the blue stuff if you want to. No judgment here. I usually don't use organic fertilizers like fish emulsion indoors because it stinks. So yeah, you just want to remove one of the plant containers, and then you fill up the tray with water. Now these will absorb from the bottom, and I'm going to put this other one back here. There we go. And then you just let it sit for about an hour, 2 hours, and then you take the water and pour it into one of your houseplants because that's got fertilization in it and I don't want to waste it. And I forgot to mention, you really don't need to fertilize the seedlings until they start to develop their true leaves. So the first leaves that come out when a seedling germinates, they're called the cotyledons, and they really are not the true leaves. They look different from the true leaves. The true leaves are usually the next set that comes out. That's when you need to start fertilizing. And how often do you fertilize? Every time I water, I usually give it a little bit of fertility. Now remember that the more you fertilize, the faster the plant is going to grow. So if you've got a lot of time left before you plant outside, you may not want to fertilize as often. Once every couple of weeks is plenty. I just showed you a bottom watering technique. Can you water from the top? Is that okay to do? Of course it's okay to do. It's just that you need to be aware of some things that could take over if you water too much from the top and that surface of the soil is damp. And that actually leads me to the next part of our discussion, which is how to troubleshoot and manage pests and diseases in your indoor setting. Probably the number one disease, and it's a fatal disease that takes out a lot of young seedlings, especially in a beginner gardener setup when you don't know what to look for, is something called damping off disease. Now, this is a fungal disease caused by fungi and water mold, and it's usually soil-borne, and that's why they often recommend that you sterilize your soil or use sterile soil in an indoor setting. Now, these disease-carrying fungi and water mold usually thrive in moist and humid conditions. where the surface of the soil is wet, where there's poor ventilation, and those are all conditions that actually encourage the growth of this disease and cause it to spread very rapidly. So, what does damping off disease look like, and how do you prevent it? Well, damping off disease usually looks like fuzzy white things that develop on the surface, those thin fungal strands, and then you usually notice it drastically when the seedlings kind of just develop a weakness at the bottom of their stem and they fall over and die, and it's usually too late by then. However, I am always vigilant. This is why I look at my seedlings every single day, is because I am looking for those thin white strands of fungal activity developing on the surface. And I usually scratch it off, and it usually takes care of the problem. Of course, I've got to keep coming back and looking every single day. The other thing that I do is I use diluted hydrogen peroxide solution. So this one is 3% hydrogen peroxide solution. So you can dilute this 1:4. 4 parts of water, 1 part of hydrogen peroxide, and just sort of squirt the surface. Now, the extra oxygen that this will bring to the surface of the soil will cause a lot of that fungal stuff to die off. So really effective. Now, we already talked about algae, and yeah, it's best to prevent algae from developing too much as well, though it's not as fatal as damping off disease that fungal activity causes. Fungus gnats are also a big culprit when it comes to damping off disease, because their larvae in the soil will eat away at the roots and also encourage fungal activity development. So prevention is better than cure. Always use these yellow sticky traps. You can see how many fungus gnats. I'm going to have to replace that actually. I keep adding new ones. But yeah, there is always going to be fungal activity developing on your soil, and those fungus gnats are horrible at encouraging the development of fungal activity. So keep them at bay. Use the yellow sticky traps. So other than fungus gnats, the other little critter that you need to watch out for is aphids. Now, my pepper plants are particularly susceptible to aphids. In fact, I come out every day and check for aphids on them, because you see right there? You see that guy right there? Yeah. You can hardly see him because he blends so perfectly with the color of the leaf, but that's an aphid. And I will squish him right away, because you know what? He or she will have babies like at the rate of 20, 30 a day. These aphids are just unbelievable when it comes to survival skills. And they have so many predators outdoors, but indoors, nothing, right? So if you have aphids on your seedlings, another sure sign of that is if you've got ants. Yeah, if you've got ants, then it means that there are aphids nearby. So get rid of aphids. And, the way I get rid of aphids, it's probably not advisable. I'm going to tell you anyway. Yeah, I use 70% rubbing alcohol, not diluted or anything, just straight, strong 70% rubbing alcohol. This is isopropyl alcohol that you get at the drugstore. Yeah, I know that it's probably not advisable, mainly because it can kill off certain very young seedlings. In fact, they don't even advise it. They say dilute it, whatever, 4 parts to 1 or something like that if you want to use it on plants. I don't do that, you guys. I just use straight up alcohol, and believe you me, it works. And the plants all survive. I particularly love using this on my strawberries because the aphids really get in there. It's very, very difficult to get rid of them, squirting with water and all of that. Now, it's just not possible with plants where the aphids are all the way in there. So this thing works like magic. Don't tell anyone I told you, but thank me later. All right, now you know how to deal with aphids and fungus gnats. You know how to water your seedlings. You know how to fertilize. They're growing beautifully. And now you come to the next step, which is actually the final step before they go outdoors. And that is, how do you pot them up? Should you pot them up? What are some of the things that I am doing, some new techniques I'm using to pot them up? I'm excited to share all of that with you. So let's dive in. So remember how I told you that you want to start seeds in a bit of a shallow container because you want the warmth of the soil nearest the heat mat to help those seeds germinate. Well, as a result of it, you have this situation where you put a lot of seeds in, if you're anything like me, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seedlings that germinated in a single cell. No way that they're going to be able to grow to any decent size. They're going to be competing at every level. So you're going to have to uppot these, separate these out, and give each of them their own home. Particularly tomato seedlings, they grow really fast under the right conditions, and you want to give them the right conditions because you want wonderful, healthy seedlings when they're ready to go outside. So these seedlings will need to be potted up. However, I will not pot them up until they are actually a decent size. And for decent size, I would say maybe 2 sets of true leaves. These don't even have their first set of true leaves yet. These barely germinated a few days ago, and they're looking so cute. But once they get about 2 sets of leaves, they're going to get way too big for these little seed starter cells. So that's when I will be potting them up. Now, there's also the other argument. So one might say, hey, I'm not starting a lot of tomato seedlings. I'm starting just a few. So why not start them in the container that you're going to be growing them up to anyway and save yourself a step? And yes, you can do that. In fact, for tomatoes, it probably will work. But there is a challenge in starting seeds in larger containers. The main challenge is that it is much more difficult for it to dry out. And seeds and seedlings do need, not seeds, but seedlings do need to be able to have the soil breathe and have oxygen in the soil. And if it is constantly saturated with moisture and there's such a large container and it doesn't dry out, then your seedlings are not going to grow as healthy. So that's why you start them in something like this, and then you uppot them into something like this when they are large enough and their root system has reached a point and they are able to use all of that nice water and nutrients that you're putting in this large container for them. By the way, if you are curious about these seed starting trays, they have these slits on the sides, and they actually help with healthy root development because they allow more of that oxygen in there. And if they don't have these slits, you will notice that seedlings tend to kind of swirl their roots around after a certain point, and it's called getting root bound. And that doesn't happen with these kind of seed starting trays that have the slits on the side. These are from Vago Garden, and I am a Vago Garden affiliate. So if you do want to purchase these seed starting trays, I've got a discount code and a link in the description. Thanks for your support. Now, I promised you that I was going to be showing you a new method that I'm using to uppot some of my seedlings. So I am really excited to share with you the seed snail. So this over here is a seed snail. Basically, it is a strip of any kind of material. I've got bubble wrap here, but you can use cardboard. You can use a lot of different things. I'll do a whole episode on how I set up the seed snail. And it's a viral technique from last year that I decided to try and I'm really liking. But these coleus seedlings, they were all clustered in this little cup, and I uppotted them into the seed snail, and now each of them has their own little space to grow into. And I think the biggest opportunity or the biggest benefit of seed snails, there's a lot, but one of the biggest ones for me is that you see the space that this occupies, it's about the same space as this one tray here, but the number of seedlings in here is the same as in 3 of these trays. So I have been able to accommodate 3 times the amount of seedlings that I normally would have in this space. And that is going to save me a whole lot of very, very precious room that I need in my grow station for a lot of other things. I've got several other seed snails. This one's got a bunch of marigolds. That one's got gazania. This is more marigolds, more marigolds. I've even got sweet potato slips. I had a whole bunch of slips that were just literally crowding this tray. I separated them all out and I have uppotted them into this. I can't tell you how much of stress it has saved me by having a place to put my sweet potato slips. This was just becoming a nasty mess. So this seed snail thing, you guys, I am really liking it. So I hope you follow along. I am going to be putting together a video on how I made the seed snails. I keep calling them sea snails, but I'll talk about the pros, the cons, things for you to watch out for, and all of the benefits and how to do it. We'll do it together. So thanks for hanging out with me, folks, and check out all the other episodes. I will leave a link to them somewhere here. Until next time, live green, love your greens, and have a wonderful gardening season.